Imagine walking into a room, maybe it's a meeting, a party, a classroom, and suddenly something shifts in your body. You feel it in your chest first. That subtle tightness, like your lungs don't want to take in too much air. Then in your stomach, a slight churn, as if your instincts are warning you of danger. But there is no danger. No one's attacking you. No one's yelling. In fact, no one's even looking your way. And yet you feel uneasy in your skin, unsure about what to say, suspicious of your own presence. You brush it off, you smile, you play it cool. But deep inside, a quieter voice is already speaking. Don't say too much. Don't draw attention. Don't do anything that could get you noticed. Now pause and ask yourself, how many times has that voice made decisions for you? How many moments have you stayed quiet? Not because you had nothing to say, but because it felt safer. How many dreams have you kept secret? How many ideas have you sat on? Not because they weren't good, but because you were afraid of how they'd be received. This is how fear works. Not loudly, but quietly. Not through force, but through subtle shaping. Not as panic, but as hesitation. And over time, it blends in. It becomes part of your rhythm, part of your logic, part of your identity. You tell yourself, I'm just cautious. I'm not that kind of person. I like to stay behind the scenes. But if you look closely, those aren't always truths. Sometimes they're stories. Stories fear tells you, so it can stay in control. The real danger isn't that fear shows up when we need it to. The real danger is that it never leaves. And we stop noticing it's there. You start living in response to it. You let it sculpt your choices. You build a life around what feels least risky, not what feels most alive. And maybe no one ever told you that was happening. Maybe no one ever explained how subtle fear can be. How convincing it is when it disguises itself as self-preservation. But if you're watching this, something inside you is already waking up to that truth. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. We all like to believe we're rational, that our decisions come from logic, clarity, or experience. But if you look closer, you'll notice something else behind many of your choices. A pause, a second guess, a sudden pull to retreat. And more often than not, that pull is fear. Not the kind of fear that shouts, not panic or terror, but something quieter, the kind that whispers, what if they don't like you? What if you fail? What if this isn't who you're supposed to be? It doesn't come in moments of chaos. It comes in the ordinary, in the conversation you hold back from, in the opportunity you let slide, in the way you shrink just a little when something real tries to emerge from inside you. This isn't some dramatic movie-style fear. It's the day-to-day kind, the socially acceptable kind, the kind that doesn't make headlines, but still defines lives. And it's everywhere. Because somewhere along the line, you learned that to avoid pain, you had to avoid exposure. That being too bold, too different, too emotional, too expressive was dangerous. And that message, it stuck. Now it lives in how you carry yourself, how you respond when someone looks at you too long, how you hesitate before saying what you really think, how you smile to smooth the tension, even when it costs you your truth. And most people never stop to ask, what part of me is actually making this decision? They call it strategy, or emotional intelligence, or professionalism. But underneath, it's often the same old mechanism. Fear quietly pulling the strings. But you're not most people. And the fact that you're here means something. It means there's a part of you, maybe just a small voice, that's tired of being shaped by fear. That wants something more. That's ready to question the patterns instead of just living inside them. In this video, we're going to do exactly that. We'll explore the psychology of fear, why it hides in your thoughts, your habits, your self-image. We'll break down the mechanisms that keep it alive, how it feeds on avoidance, how it wires your nervous system, and how it gets passed from one version of you to the next. Then we'll dive into the philosophy, Nietzsche, Kierkegaard, Jung, Seneca. Each of them faced fear not as a threat to be suppressed, but as a doorway into something deeper. A way to face yourself and become more than what fear told you you could be. So watch until the end, because by the time this is over, you won't just understand fear more clearly. You'll start to see how to live beyond it, not by becoming fearless, but by becoming free. Fear doesn't just strike during emergencies. It becomes a quiet filter, shaping how you think, what you say, and what you believe you're allowed to want. It starts early. Sometimes it's not one big trauma. It's subtle. A parent's disapproval, a teacher's dismissal, a moment when you spoke up and it backfired. Your body remembers, not as story, but as strategy. Now, as an adult, you hesitate, you calculate, you second guess. You don't call it fear, you call it being careful. But under the surface, you're avoiding something. Exposure, rejection, disapproval, vulnerability. In psychology, we understand this as the formation of core beliefs, deep, unconscious convictions about who you are and how the world works. They sound like, if I speak up, I'll be rejected. If I fail, I won't be loved. If I'm not perfect, I'll be abandoned. These beliefs aren't thoughts you choose. They form as protective mechanisms, ways to stay safe in environments that once made you feel unsafe, and once formed, they become automatic. They influence what you notice, what you avoid, and how you interpret every situation. You don't say what you really think, not because you're unsure, but because you fear how it might land. You wait for the perfect time, not because you're planning, but because fear has disguised itself as perfectionism. You say, I'm just not ready. But the truth is, you're protecting yourself from the feeling of falling short, and that's how fear stays alive. The brain is wired for repetition. The more you avoid discomfort, the more your brain equates avoidance with safety. Fear becomes not just a reaction, it becomes a system. And like any system, it becomes invisible over time. You might say you're a high achiever, but underneath, it's fear of failure that's driving you. You might pride yourself on being independent, but look closer. Are you afraid of needing someone? You might say you're chill and low maintenance, but what if you're afraid to take up space? Fear is clever. It adapts. It hides behind your self-image, and eventually, it starts looking like just the way I am. But that's the lie. What looks like personality is often just protection, and protection always has a cost. The longer you obey these patterns, the more fear becomes self-reinforcing. You don't take the risk, so you never succeed. You stay silent, so you're never misunderstood. You hold back, so you're never fully rejected. And that becomes your proof. Proof that playing small is smart. Proof that blending in is safe. Proof that you're doing the right thing. But it's not proof. It's just repetition. And it's not strength. It's fear in disguise. But here's the turning point. Everything fear tries to protect you from, it also steals from you. It protects you from embarrassment, but robs you of expression. It shields you from failure, but blocks your growth. It keeps you from heartbreak, but denies you connection. The cost of safety is often your aliveness. The moment you realize this is the moment you start to break the loop. Not by becoming fearless, but by becoming aware. Start by noticing the pattern. When does fear speak up in your day-to-day life? Is it before a phone call? When you're about to post something vulnerable? When you're about to ask for what you want? That's the moment to pause. Not to silence the fear, but to question it. Ask, what is this fear actually protecting? And do I still need that protection? You might find that your body is reacting to a threat that no longer exists, that the version of you who needed that armor has grown, and that today, the fear is outdated. The moment you recognize that, you have a choice. You can follow the fear, or you can face it. Facing it doesn't mean ignoring it. It means seeing it clearly. Understanding its origins. and then making a conscious decision that reflects who you are now, not who you were then. This is what modern therapy calls pattern interruption, breaking the automatic loop by inserting awareness. Every time you speak when you normally stay silent, every time you move toward discomfort instead of away, you're teaching your nervous system something new. That discomfort isn't danger. That emotion isn't failure. That fear isn't the end. It's the beginning. And each time you do this, the pattern weakens. You build trust in yourself, not because everything goes perfectly, but because you learn that you can handle what happens. And that's real freedom, not the absence of fear, but the presence of self-leadership. If psychology shows us how fear forms in the mind, then philosophy shows us something even deeper. What fear reveals about our place in the world. It doesn't just limit our choices. It reveals our relationship with freedom, meaning, and the self. Friedrich Nietzsche believed that most people live not from purpose, but from fear. Fear of freedom, fear of judgment, fear of becoming who they really are. He saw fear not as a rare affliction, but as the quiet force behind conformity. He wrote that the majority prefer safety over truth. They'll trade the unknown for the familiar, even if the familiar keeps them small. According to Nietzsche, this is the herd instinct, the desire to blend in, obey, avoid discomfort, and resist the burden of becoming fully conscious. And the root of that instinct? Fear. He said that the strongest souls are not the ones who avoid pain, but the ones who walk toward it, because they know that on the other side of fear is freedom. But freedom isn't easy. In fact, it's terrifying. That's what Søren Kierkegaard tried to express in his concept of angst, a deep existential unease that comes not from something happening to you, but from realizing how much power you actually have. Angst appears when you're standing on the edge of choice. It's not fear of falling. It's the realization that you could jump, that you're not just a product of fate or circumstance, that you choose. And when you realize that, when you see how uncomfortably free you are, it shakes the ground beneath your feet. Kierkegaard didn't believe we should run from this feeling. He believed it was a call, because the discomfort of freedom is the price of becoming real. Carl Jung brought this into the language of the psyche. He saw fear not as something to push away, but as a signal from the unconscious. Not every fear is a warning. Sometimes it's a summons. Jung argued that the very thing you fear might be the part of yourself that needs to be integrated, not because it's dangerous, but because it holds a truth you've been unwilling to face. If you're afraid of rejection, maybe you've never learned how to stand fully in your worth. If you're afraid of being seen, maybe there's a voice inside you that was silenced long ago, and now it's trying to emerge. Jung's solution wasn't to conquer fear, but to understand it, confront it, and make it conscious. Only then can you move from reaction to transformation. His words were clear. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Fear unexamined becomes fate, but fear examined becomes freedom. Even the Stoic philosophers, often seen as champions of logic over emotion, deeply understood fear. Seneca, in particular, saw fear as a mental habit, a form of suffering we create through imagination. He wrote, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." And he wasn't wrong. So much of what we fear isn't what is, but what might be. We project catastrophe, we imagine humiliation, we rehearse failure, and in doing so, we live inside fears that may never materialize. Seneca believed the antidote was clarity, not bravado, not denial, but honest reflection on what we can control and what we can't. He trained himself to sit with the possibility of loss, not because he wanted it to happen, but because he wanted to know that if it did, he wouldn't be destroyed by it. The Stoics didn't tell us to eliminate fear. They told us to outgrow its influence. So, what do these thinkers have in common? They weren't trying to live without fear. They were trying to live with their eyes open. They understood that fear is a signpost, not to danger, but to responsibility. Not to weakness, but to choice. You don't get to choose what scares you, but you get to choose what you do with it. And that choice, to face the fear instead of obey it, that's the moment when your life begins to shift, because that's when fear stops being a dictator and starts becoming a teacher. You've probably heard the phrase, feel the fear and do it anyway. It sounds bold, motivational, but the truth is, most people don't even realize fear is guiding their actions to begin with. They think they're making calculated decisions. They think they're being smart or practical. But underneath it all, there's a consistent undercurrent. What if I fail? What if I look stupid? What if this makes everything worse? Fear becomes the default, not through loud panic, but through quiet hesitation. And that hesitation calcifies. It becomes habit. Then it becomes a personality. But here's the shift. You don't have to eliminate fear. You have to understand it deeply enough that it no longer runs your life. So ask yourself, where is fear currently making your choices for you? What conversations are you avoiding? What projects have you delayed? What part of your truth have you buried just to avoid discomfort? These questions aren't easy, but they matter. Because fear doesn't always show up as terror. Sometimes it shows up as perfectionism, or procrastination, or a tendency to wait until you feel ready. But what if the fear isn't there to paralyze you, but to point you toward exactly where your work is? That's the mindset shift. Let's go deeper. Start noticing when fear speaks. That spike in your chest before you raise your hand. That impulse to smooth things over instead of saying what you mean. That quiet, invisible tug, pulling you back when something big is on the horizon. That's the moment you stop. And instead of pushing through it blindly, or walking away entirely, you pause and ask, what is this fear trying to protect? Is it your self-image? A childhood wound? An old belief about what happens when you stand out? You don't need to psychoanalyze yourself to death. You just need to recognize the pattern and break the automatic obedience. Try this. Next time you feel the fear, name it. Then respond with intention. Say, I see you. I know what you're trying to do, but I'm not letting you drive today. Then act, even if your voice shakes, even if your hands tremble, even if every cell in your body wants to retreat. Because courage is not the absence of fear. It's the refusal to let fear decide. This is the principle behind exposure therapy, a cornerstone of psychological treatment for anxiety. The more you approach what scares you, the more your brain rewires itself. You build a new reality, one where fear is no longer the boss, not because it disappears, but because it loses credibility. You spoke up and didn't fall apart. You tried and didn't die of shame. You acted and the world didn't end. Each moment like that creates new neural pathways. Each action reteaches your body what's possible. This is how transformation happens. Not all at once, not in a flash of confidence, but through small repeated acts of rebellion against the fear-driven life. And over time, you'll notice something powerful. You're no longer making decisions from a place of protection. You're making them from a place of expansion. You'll stop asking, will they approve of me? And start asking, does this align with who I want to become? You'll stop needing guarantees and start building the kind of self-trust that can survive uncertainty. Because the goal is not to live without fear. The goal is to build a self that fear can't control. So where do you begin? Start small. Take one step in the direction that scares you. Say what you mean in one real conversation. Share something that matters, even if no one claps. And then do it again. Not for the applause, not for the outcome, but to show yourself that you no longer need fear's permission to live your life. Because you don't. Maybe fear has been running the show longer than you realized. Maybe it's been behind more decisions than you cared to admit, guiding your hesitation, influencing your silence, shaping the life you've built. And maybe that's okay. Because now you see it. Fear isn't a flaw. It's a response, a memory, a shield. But at some point, that shield starts keeping you from everything you were meant to become. If you trace back the patterns, the times you held back, the risks you avoided, the dreams you watered down, you'll often find fear quietly whispering, "Don't go too far. Don't ask for too much. Don't become too real." And the tragedy is not just what fear blocks you from doing, it's who it blocks you from being. You're not here to perform. You're not here to play small. You're not here to shrink so others feel comfortable. You're here to become fully, unapologetically yourself. And that version of you doesn't wait for fear to leave. That version of you walks forward with fear and acts anyway. Nietzsche taught that real strength comes not from avoiding discomfort, but from facing the chaos of life with open eyes. Kierkegaard reminded us that the anxiety of choice is proof of freedom, and that freedom is the birthplace of purpose. Jung showed us that the parts of ourselves we're most afraid of are often the ones that hold our greatest power. And Seneca? He taught us that fear, left unexamined, becomes a habit, but once examined, it becomes a doorway. So what if this is your moment? Not to crush fear, not to wait for it to disappear, but to finally recognize it and move anyway. You don't need to be fearless. You just need to be brave enough to stop waiting. Because the moment you stop asking fear for permission is the moment you start living on your own terms. So the question isn't, what would I do if I weren't afraid? The real question is, what will I do now that I know fear doesn't get to decide? That's the moment you begin. Not someday, not when you feel ready. Now,